For 2 days they lay in the shelter of a rock overhang, drinking rainwater and chewing softened strips of ruined dried fish. Fever came and went. Naram dreamed of golden eyes beneath water. On the third day he woke before sunrise and found the old man from the ridge sitting near the entrance, feeding a tiny fire with driftwood. Naram did not start this time. "Am I dead?" he asked. "No." "Then why are you here?" The old man poked the coals with a stick. "Because you are finally ready to listen." Naram tried to rise and failed. Pain pinned him back. The old man handed him a cup of warm water steeped with bitter leaves. Naram drank without protest. For a while there was only the crackle of fire and Eliab's rough breathing nearby. Then Naram said, "I saw it." "Yes." "I could not touch it." "No." "I could not even truly wound it." "No." Naram stared out at the paling sea. "I thought if I faced what took my brother, I would reclaim something." "And did you?" He closed his eyes. "I learned that my hatred was smaller than the thing I cast it toward." The old man nodded. "That is one way of saying it." Naram swallowed hard. Why would God make such a creature? The old man's gaze moved to the horizon, where the first edge of sun was beginning to stain the world. Why make mountains unclimbable by some? Why make storms no man can halt? Why make stars beyond counting? Not all power was made for human handling. He folded his hands over the staff. There are wonders that expose arrogance simply by existing. Naram laughed bitterly. "Then I have been exposed." "Yes." Something in the old man's tone held neither mockery nor cruelty, only truth. Naram stared at his scarred hands. Hands that had mended boats, hauled nets, lifted stones, fought men, believed themselves equal to whatever stood before them. Not equal, he knew now, never equal. "What do I do with that?" he whispered. "With what?" "With being small." The old man looked at him for a long time. "You begin," he said, "by no longer calling it weakness." Eliab recovered slowly. So did Naram. The old man, who never gave another name, brought herbs, fish, and fresh water. He spoke little unless asked, and even then only enough. Naram ceased pressing him for answers. It no longer seemed likely the man belonged to ordinary explanations. When at last Naram could walk the shore again, he found the place where Leviathan's wake had glowed brightest that night. There was nothing there now but tide foam and gull tracks. He stood for a long while listening to the breathing sea, not challenging it, listening. A month later, a merchant vessel sighted their signal fire and took them aboard. When Tirzah's harbor came into view, Naram's chest tightened more fiercely than it had when Leviathan rose from the deep. The village looked unchanged. The sloping roofs, the smoke columns, the nets spread on rock to dry. Yet he returned to it altered in ways no one could see. The townspeople gathered when they docked. Murmurs passed through them like wind in grass. They had expected corpses, if anything. Instead, they saw two gaunt men step ashore, one limping worse than before, one scarred, burned, and silent. Naram's mother ran to him and stopped only when she was close enough to search his face. Then she embraced him with such force he nearly wept. "You came back," she whispered. "I did." She drew away and touched the scar on his cheek. "What did you find?" Naram looked past her to the sea. At first he thought to answer with grandeur, with thunder, with words worthy of songs, but truth had become simpler than pride. "I found," he said slowly, "that there are powers in this world no man masters." The harbor quieted. Some expected more and leaned in. Naram gave it. "I found that courage is not the same as dominion. I found that hatred does not make a spear strike deeper. I found that the sea does not answer to my grief." He looked around at the faces of Tirzah, fishermen, widows, children, skeptics, elders. "And I found that to stand before something greater than yourself is not always defeat. Sometimes it is the beginning of wisdom." No one spoke. Then Eliab barked a laugh and nearly fell over coughing. The tension broke. Life resumed as it always does, but stories changed. In years afterward, when boys at the harbor swore they would one day sail out and bind Leviathan with chains, old men no longer needed to smack them into silence. They sent them instead to Naram, who had seen the deep king and returned. He would sit with them on the seawall at dusk, mending a net or sharpening a hook, and tell them what could be told. He described the eyes first, always the eyes, the impossible scale, the armor sealed tight as stone, the fire in its throat, the way the sea itself seemed to make room for it, the way all human boasting dies when true enormity rises before it. Sometimes the boys listened in awe, sometimes in disbelief. One once said, trying to sound fearless, "So you failed." Naram studied the child for a moment and smiled faintly. "No," he said, "I went seeking to conquer and returned having learned my place. That is not failure, it is mercy." Years later, after his mother died and Eliab was buried above the harbor under a marker of plain, uncarved stone, Naram took to sailing only near shore. He married a weaver named Tirzah, whose laughter could cut through his darkest moods. They had 2 daughters, both fiercer than gulls and twice as sharp-tongued. He taught them the sea, not to fear it blindly, not to worship it, but to respect what was not theirs. Once, when his eldest was 10, she pointed toward the horizon where a silver wake gleamed strangely under moonlight. "Father," she whispered, "is that him?" Naram followed her gaze. Far off, too far for certainty, something long and dark broke the water and vanished, leaving a gleam behind. His daughter waited, wide-eyed. At last he said, "Perhaps." Could anyone ever catch him? Naram thought of his younger self, burning with certainty, spear in hand, imagining the world existed to be subdued. Then he thought of the nameless old man on the island, of Eliab's broken body dragged from the waves, of the burning mouth beneath the sea, and of the truth that had stripped him down more cleanly than shipwreck. He rested a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "No," he said, "and not everything must be caught." She seemed to consider this. "Then why is he there?" Naram looked out over the darkening water, where the world widened into mystery and power and things beyond the reach of nets. "To remind us," he said, "that the maker of the sea is greater still." The wind shifted. Waves struck the harbor wall below in slow, measured blows. Lamps came alive one by one in Tirzah behind them. Far out in the darkness, the shining wake faded, leaving only sea. But Naram knew better now than to think absence meant emptiness. Somewhere beneath the great waters, Leviathan moved, armored and untamed, king over the sons of pride, a living terror no hook could hold and no hand could master. And somewhere above him ruled the one who had made both sea and man, both storm and breath, both the creature that humbled and the soul that learned humility. Naram stood with his daughter until the last light died. Then together they turned from the horizon and walked home.